Well, my name is Spencer Schrader. I am the UAS Flight Operations Manager at Kansas State University. I get to work with drones on a daily basis, so not a horrible job. A little bit about Kansas State University. We actually have 3 campuses here in Kansas. The main one everybody's probably familiar with in Manhattan, where all the sports are located. And then we have one here in Kansas City as well in Olathe. And the coolest one, in my opinion, of course, would be the campus in Salina, which is about an hour north of Wichita. And that campus is focused primarily on aviation. So roughly about 80 to 90% of the students there in Salina are focused on aviation degrees. We have 2 undergraduate degrees for drones. We have an engineering and technology degree, and then we have a flight operations degree as well. So what I'm going to be talking about this morning is drones as a first responder for really just anybody in public safety. Now, this has been a pretty big topic for the last 7 years or so, 7 to 8 years. And so what we're going to talk about this morning is some of the things that they've been used for up to this point in time, but then also where we're going to go in the next few years, 4 or 5 years, what it's going to look like for drones as a first responder. So the first thing is, what the heck is drones as a first responder? Well, it's really the general term that's used for folks using drones within public safety, whether that's law enforcement, fire, emergency management, but it's getting eyes on scene very early on in that scene. So some of the things that we've seen over the last several years that drones are being used for, the biggest one is search and rescue. I know a couple of people in the audience so far that I've seen have experience with drones. Can I just get a show of hands? Who has used drones up to this point in time? Okay, so quite a few of you. Awesome. That's exciting. So some of the things, again, as I mentioned, that we've seen within public safety for drones is going to be search and rescue. You can imagine getting eyes up above the ground. Typically, we're down walking on the ground. It's pretty hard to see in taller grass. Maybe we have some overgrown areas, some trees, especially wide areas. That's where drones really come in handy. We can think about getting up a bird's eye view of an area and searching that area. Again, wide area searches. That's where drones really come in handy. Not only do we have the zoom cameras on these, but we also have the thermal, so you're not restricted to just daylight hours. We can go out at night, search for that heat signature, and be able to find what we're looking for. The second thing that we've seen over the last several years is disaster response. Flooding, hurricanes, tornadoes, especially here in the Midwest, has been a big use case for drones. So you can imagine, again, if a tornado comes through the town, wipes the majority of the town out, how do we get our response team out there? Well, what if one road is blocked off by a down power line? Well, a drone's going to be able to go up above the city, locate the best route for our first responders to get in there, and relay that information to them. So disaster response is the second key item. Overwatch, for those within law enforcement, Overwatch is a pretty big deal to be able to get eyes on the scene, relay that information. Really, again, you can hear that word, information. We're always looking for information off of these drones. So if you have maybe a barricaded suspect, you could actually get eyes on the scene and provide that information to officers at the scene. Crime scene or accident scene mapping. This is a very big use case that's been popping up over the last really 2 to 3 years. It's been around quite a bit before that, but what we're seeing nowadays is aircraft like this are able to go over a scene, map that scene out into a 3-dimensional image. If you don't want necessarily 3D data, it can get 2D information down to the centimeter level accuracy. So you're able to do measurements just from the images that you're able to obtain from the drone itself. Some of the other things that you're able to do, that information that you take from that drone can actually be implemented and imported and work with your TLS data. So as soon as we're getting our terrestrial laser scanner there, we're able to get that data off the drone, use those images, and combine it with that TLS information as well. So very useful by means of just flying over the scene. Maybe it's an accident on the road and you're trying to get that highway opened up as quickly as possible. A drone can document that scene, and it can do it very efficiently, and you don't necessarily need it on the ground anymore. Tactical scenarios. Clearing buildings out. That's a great use of a drone. So just recently we've thinking about the shootings here. We've had an instance in Kansas over the last 5 to 7 years where our highway patrol actually sent a drone inside the house and the suspect shot it down. And you might be saying, well, what good does that do you? Well, now you know he's armed. And it's much better to send a drone in and get shot down than send an officer in there first. So sending those drones in, again, as a first responder, responding to that scene first. Now, you can think about the technology that has grown on board these aircraft. For those of you who raised your hand earlier thinking about flying drones in the past, depends on how long you've been involved with this and flying drones, but the technology on these has rapidly expanded. Not only has the sensor, the cameras really improved in their technology, so now our thermal, our sensors, our zoom sensors are really improving in their technology, but also the flight time. The battery technology is finally catching up with where we need it to be. So we're able to fly for longer than what used to be 15 minutes on a battery. Now we're getting over 30 minutes, 40 minutes on some of these aircraft, which again, the longer that you can stay in the air, the more information that you can collect, the more data, again, overall that you can collect. So the technology has vastly improved. So those are some of the things that we've seen currently up to this point in time with drones as a first responder. Again, we think about search and rescue, we think about tactical scenarios, overwatch, accident scene mapping, crime scene mapping. Those are all some of the things that we've seen with drones. So what are some of the benefits? For those of you using drones currently for first response activities, you probably recognize those benefits of having a drone on scene. Again, we mentioned this earlier, if you're trying to open up a highway, makes things much more efficient. But getting those eyes up in the sky, again, provides you a whole new level of detail that you might not have had before. So we think about all of the information that is provided to you by these drones. Again, thinking about they're fun to fly. That's one of the coolest things about them, they're fun to fly. But the most important part, and the whole reason we use them, is because of this camera on board of this drone. We all want the information, we all want the data. Now, not only is this being able to be streamed back to your controller, which is great because you're able to see that video feed, but now with that technology and the rapid expanse of that technology, another thing that we're starting to see is being able to live stream and push that video feed somewhere else. So for you as decision makers, that's important because maybe you're not on scene. So it's important that you are allowed to be able to see that video anywhere, really, theoretically anywhere in the world. You could get that video feed with 2 to 3 second latency. Very good type of latency. Again, getting that information on scene, very critical. So some of the other benefits, do you think? Obviously, we've had helicopters in the past. Well, how expensive is it to operate a helicopter per hour? You could think of several $100s, thousands of dollars for maintenance. But then we start looking at these drones, and these drones may only cost several $1,000s, and that's just a one-time deal, and they can operate for years at a time. So a really good investment as far as aircraft go. And a lot of folks, a lot of departments are starting to move away from helicopters. They obviously still have their place, but nowadays we're starting to see more and more drones. Now obviously they do not come in just the small size. You can get all the way up to larger fixed wing size drones that look just like a regular airplane, and these things can fly for hours at a time. So especially things like disaster response efforts, that's a great use of a larger fixed wing style drone to be able to go out and do that. So where are we going with drones as a first responder? And that's really the exciting thing that I wanted to talk about today. Again, we've seen kind of what we've talked about. We've seen these over the last several years. I know that several of you guys probably have all of your squad cars outfitted with drones. I know that's become more popular for departments out there to have their own squad cars equipped with these drones, to where if a deputy, if an officer gets out there, they can actually pop that drone up on scene, take images, and then they can use their ground stuff from there. So that's again been primarily the current things that we've done. What about the future? Where are we going? Well, more popular as of late, and where we're going over the next several years, 4 to 5 years, is actually literally getting the drones there before any other entity is on scene. So there's a police department in California that's been doing this for the last 3 years or so, where they get a call and dispatch sends a drone out instead of the patrol car. And that drone goes out in the city, they observe what's going on the scene, and then they relay that information again back to dispatch. And dispatch is able to make an educated decision based on what they see on scene in that location. So for example, you could think of a domestic dispute, maybe out in the front yard, neighbor calls 911, dispatch sends a drone. That drone is able to observe, sees that, okay, it's de-escalated, we don't need to send a patrol unit out to that area, not necessarily immediately. So we can prioritize a little bit easier. So that's one of the great things about drones right now and where we're going. Now regulations, I'm sure everybody's probably familiar with some of the regulations for these things. Regulations have not necessarily caught up to that, and so that's why we're still, again, 4 to 5 years out away. But you can imagine, and as I mentioned, this police department in California, I'd like to share some facts about that. Over the last 3 years, they have sent a drone to 11,000 different calls. Okay, so 11,000 different calls. They've sent a drone out there. And out of those 11,000, a little over 6,000 of those calls, that drone has actually arrived first on scene before anybody ever shows up. So that drone's on scene, getting eyes on, sending that video feed back to dispatch. Again, over half of those calls that it goes out on, it's the first on scene. Now, out of those 6,300 calls that drone arrives on scene first, almost half of those calls, almost 3,000 of those calls, it's able to prioritize the patrol unit to a different call. It's able to say, okay, it's not needed at this moment. We can send it somewhere else. So you can think of the time, the resources, the money that is able to save by getting that drone, again, as a first responder rather than maybe later on. Now, let's say that you as a, again, decision maker, maybe your dispatch is viewing this video feed. Even if you do have your deputy show up on scene first, that drone is there to, again, keep an eye on the situation, keep an eye on that scene as time progresses. Now, you might be saying, all right, Spencer, I'm not going to, I've got a county maybe 600-700 square miles in size. I'm not going to send something this size out and let that get me eyes on the scene first. And I agree. I'd say that'd probably be a waste of resources. If this thing can only fly for 30 minutes at a time, you might not make it halfway across your county by the time the battery needs to be replaced. But as I mentioned, some of the more technologically advanced aircraft out there are able to fly for hours at a time. Those are those larger fixed wing type of aircraft. So if it is an emergency, if it is a call out that you think, okay, I need to send a drone up, those fixed wing aircraft can get halfway across the county, and they don't have to follow roads, they don't have to follow stop signs, stop lights. They can, again, go fly over in basically a crow's flight just straight across the ground. Gets you on scene much faster, gets eyes on the scene much faster, and that's some of the things that we have seen with these drones as a first responder. So overall, we can see as programs have been formed, as programs have been starting to develop, early on, if you have started a program, early on you might be dealing with drones this size, again, just pulling it out of your patrol car, your vehicle, and getting it eyes up in the air. But as we progress with not only our regulations, but also the technology, what we'll see is we'll see those drones actually going out first. Okay, so you'll see them launching from the city, from a regional area, and going out and getting eyes on the scene first. Now, that seems like it might be pretty far away. It might seem, well, that's unrealistic. But one of the things that is being developed as well, and one of the things I've kind of been alluding to, is these regulations. So how many people are familiar with Part 107 regulations here? Quite a few people. Awesome, that's exciting. So as you guys have probably experienced, these Part 107 regulations have actually changed over the last year and a half. Okay, so April of last year, of 2021, those regulations got an update, which was very important, much needed, but it wasn't everything that we needed, right? One of the biggest things for law enforcement officers is flying great distances, far distances, flying beyond what we call visual line of sight. And that's very difficult to obtain that permission from the FAA. So one of the things that the FAA has been working on and researching on is something called beyond visual line of sight operations, unwavered, so not wavered. And what I mean by that is you guys are familiar with Part 107, and what they're looking at doing is making a Part 108 now. So with that Part 108, their pilots now be certified to fly out to greater distances, fly beyond their visual line of sight, which again would be a great tool, great resource to have. You're not necessarily limited to your own visual line of sight area. So that's just a little bit about drones as a first responder. And what are we doing at K-State to enable these types of operations? Well, K-State is really focused on the training side of things. So as I mentioned, beyond visual line of sight requires things like a waiver. And so here at K-State, or at K-State, one of the things that we pride ourselves in is obtaining and helping folks get those types of waivers. So working with you on the process, developing a safety management system to be able to allow the FAA to provide you that access, but then also training you on those operations. It's one thing to go take a test. Any 16-year-old can go take a test, and then they can buy a drone from Best Buy and go out and start making money. But there's a big difference between passing that test and understanding those regulations. I'll give you an example. I had a buddy of mine call me up and he said, hey, I want to be able to go out and fly drones for my department. What do I need to do? You know, they're not really wanting me to go take the test on their own dime, so I'm gonna do it on my own. So I gave him some resources. I could have had him come through and given me some job security and have him come take one of our classes, but I gave him some resources. He went and he got a 74 or 75% on the test. He passed it. C's get degrees. That's what I tell everybody. You need a 70% or better to pass that test. So he passed it. A few weeks later, he calls me up. He said, hey, we're about to go out on a call. What do I need to know? And I had to do a face palm because what do you mean, what do you need to know? He said, isn't there something about airspace that I got to pay attention to? So again, there's a big difference between passing the test and understanding the information that's on that test. So that's one of the things that K-State prides ourselves in as well, is not only training those regulations, but also then going out and learning how to fly it. So you pass the test, but what do we need to know how to fly these drones? So those are some of the things that we're working on at K-State. I would love to talk more about it. Coming up here on the time, but you can come see us over here in booth 738 at Kansas State University. We've got a couple aircraft if you want to just take a look at the aircraft as well. If you're interested in trading some challenge coins, also have those as well. And we'd just love to talk to you about maybe what your department's doing with drones, what we could do to help you, and even if it's just talking about some of the cool things that you guys have been doing with drones. I'd love to talk to you about it. All right, again, my name is Spencer. We'll be over in booth 738. Thank you for your time this morning.